All right, so this is an extensive video about using Alchemy as a synthesizer in Logic Pro. I'm starting with just talking about, well, the principle of this entire video is covering these four areas of every synthesizer, but specifically with your Alchemy assignment in mind. We're going to talk about the sound sources in Alchemy, the filter, the modulators, and then, of course, the amp envelope. So first of all, when you pull up Alchemy as a synthesizer inside Logic, it's going to come up to this page where you browse sounds. And for this assignment specifically, you're going to want to go to Advanced, where you can see the parameters. But most importantly, we have to go to this File button here and initialize the preset. Because right now, Alchemy is playing some crazy fat synthesizer that has a lot of modulation and stuff on it that's just going to confuse the assignment. Since you're supposed to be creating your own synthesizer, this way the synthesizer will be initialized. So we initialize the preset so we have nothing but a straight saw wave. So to begin, let's talk about the sources. So the main sources for every synthesizer in Alchemy are these four different oscillators or sound sources. You can see over here in the global settings, right now I'm looking at all four sources, but I can click on these sources individually and it gives me more options inside of them. So most of the time you're going to be looking at global, but if you wanted, for instance, to change and add a filter, for instance, to just oscillator A, you can turn on the filter now and actually set a filter for just oscillator A, okay? So, and then in global, if I want to add other oscillators, I'm going to turn these on. The easiest way, of course, to add other sounds is, of course, to just click on this downward menu and cycle through them or listen to what you want. You can cycle through the different presets with these side arrows on the left or on the right side, and it will change the sound source, of course. So if I want to hear an individual sound too, I would need to mute the other ones to hear what we've got. So anyway, so there's just a lot of control in here. The level in Alchemy is set with just the volume knob, obviously. This is the coarse tuning, meaning that it's tuning in half steps, right? So if I set this to -12, it's going to tune that oscillator down an octave compared to this one. So if I want whatever I'm looking for, if I want this to be a perfect fifth, maybe I make that 7. All right, so moving on, there are other options in here that, you know, the panning, of course, is useful. You can pan the individual oscillators. You can do what you'd like with them. So let's just stick with A again. The second section, of course, is filtering. And the main filter for the synthesizer is right here. And there are two filters possible. I can have a filter here and a filter here. The pull-down menu, of course, gives me all kinds of options about the type of filtering. And I can choose them from the pull-down menu. And then we have our standard filter settings. The cutoff, right, which is where the filter begins to do its work, cutting out frequencies. The resonance, which of course is that peak at the moment the filter starts to work, essentially making it more expressive and more intense in sound. And then the drive, which is the overall volume and intensity of the sound after filtering. In addition to this, you know, if I go down here to some of these other crazy ones like FM, you can see that the knobs are going to change to modulate. Here, there's modulation, feedback, I'm assuming F-back. I'm not sure exactly what that is, probably feedback. And then here is probably the note of the what's called the carrier wave note. And this is obviously going to make a massive change to your sound. So it's going to make a huge change to the sound based on doing something like FM modulation. But as you know, low-pass filters, band-pass filters, and high-pass filters are our most common filter types that we'll be using. So let's just switch this to a regular low pass filter. I'll set the frequency right now all the way up, which essentially means that it's doing nothing. Let me get a better sound here too. Let's go to something like that. Okay, so moving on here, we also have the master, which gives you a lot of control over like some general things, global settings inside the synthesizer as well. The master volume is always tied to the first ADSR, which is our attack, decay, sustain, and release. We have our master panning, so all 4 oscillators would be controlled here. We have our coarse tuning. If we wanted to tune this up a fifth or something like that, that would be where we would control that. And then the fine tuning, of course, in sense. As I mentioned in class, the number of voices is really essential too. So if you're looking for a lead instrument, for instance, you would probably set this to 1 so that the notes don't overlap. So now I can't play 2 notes at one time. This is also useful for basses because we would obviously never want more than 1 fundamental bass note at a time. So it can be useful to set this to 1. Also, if you're going to use the glide, you can turn the glide up, and that's going to, of course, do the glissando or the sliding between notes. Okay? So, and there are 2 settings with glide. We have either rate, which is based on the interpreted like frequency of note changing. So if you're changing the note a lot, then the rate will be higher. If I go to time, this is going to relate to, this is just a fixed value of 247 milliseconds in this case. It's always 240 milliseconds. This will change based on how fast I'm playing notes. And you can see that's why it's a percentage. It's a percentage of those note values that I'm playing. All right, so that's the main area. You know, this is ADSR 1. You can see it says ADSR here, and then 1 is our main synthesizer, like the ADSR for the volume. So if I were, for instance, to change this attack time, let me turn the glide off, set the voices back to 16. This is going to affect the sound a lot, whether or not how long that attack time is, if the release time is long. So this again is kind of that main control for the attack time. Obviously, we're going to use other ADSRs and other things for modulation. So anyway, so that is the basic setup without modulation. It's fairly simple. If I want, I can have 2 different filters at a time. So I could have a high pass filter plus a band pass filter at once, and that could, you know, change the sound as well. If I don't want any filter, I could just turn these both off. All right, so let's make then the step to the next kind of the difficult stuff, and that is dealing with modulation. So as I mentioned in class, modulation is the idea of modulation in synthesis means to change or control a parameter with a vector line like automation in real time. And this is done in many ways, but the most common are an LFO envelope, a modulation envelope, or an LFO, a low frequency oscillator. So when we want to modulate something in Alchemy, it's fairly simple process, but there are some steps you have to take. So imagine I want to do something very simple like modulate this panning, right? Where I can hold down a chord and make it automatically switch back and forth between the left and the right speakers. So I'm just going to do this for single source A. And what I have to do is, first of all, if I click on this button, you can see that it turns blue. And turning blue means that it's basically been selected. And also, if you'll notice down here in the modulation panel, it says pan A because it's the A source and I'm selecting panning. And so that's the automatic button that gets selected down here, the target as it's called. So to modulate this now, I'm going to turn this on, hit an on key here. I'm also going to click on this button and choose the type of modulation I want. Now I'm going to use an LFO for the first one. and just use a simple sine wave that's going to alternate back and forth. So you can see now pan A is now going to be modulated by LFO1. And if you go over here, you can see that I now see an LFO, and you can see that the current LFO that's showing is LFO1. So these are the effect changes that I'm going to make. Right now, the rate of this LFO is set to the sync button, which means when I mouse over this, it's going to change note values down here as opposed to frequencies if I just have sync turned on or sync turned off. So this is going to lock into note values, half note, quarter note, eighth note, or whatever. I'm going to set this to 1 full measure. And the most important thing to remember, students forget this all the time, that right now I essentially actually don't have an LFO at all. I have a flat line. And until I turn up the depth here, right here, the depth knob is right in this area. It says depth. I will not see any modulation. But notice as soon as I turn up this modulation, now I see this orange line appearing above pan. And that is how I introduce the modulation. So now when I hit a key, it's going to modulate. So you can hear that too, that my note now is swimming back and forth, and you can even see the little dot appearing above or in the orange line. And it's showing you where that panning is, okay? Now, it is possible to add multiple modulations to a single thing. Just so you know, I could actually introduce 2 different oscillators at once. And what that's going to do is make the modulation way more complicated because these 2 are going to be combined together. So actually, if I do another LFO, I would need to choose new LFO and choose something else. But let's do this. Well, yeah, let me just choose a new LFO. And then you can see now this says LFO2, and LFO2 has been selected. And I have to go over here again and set the rate. So let's set the rate to quarter note, just like it is. And then I'm going to turn this up. So now let's hear what the modulation sounds like. So, and you can see from the yellow dot that's appearing, or the white dot that's appearing in the yellow line, my modulation now is actually both LFOs at the same time, creating this complicated motion. Okay? So obviously this isn't necessary to do more than one. I'm just showing you that it is possible to have 2 or 3 or more sources of modulation for a single thing. So let's do one other thing too, where we actually modulate. Well, let's add another sound. I'm going to add the B oscillator. And if I click on B here, I can actually also hit the solo button under the B. And now I'm only going to hear the B oscillator, which is nice. And what I want to do actually is do some detuning of the pitch. So I'm actually going to choose this fine tune, and I'm going to turn it on. And I'm going to actually choose another LFO. And I'm going to go down to new LFO again. And you can see this says LFO3. Now, I could use LFO2 or 1 again, but I have to remember that if I make any changes to LFO2 over here, it's going to change the panning LFO because it was using it, right? So it's really important to remember that it's because I'm sharing LFO2, any changes to it are going to change other things. So that's why I'm just going straight to LFO3, which is the new one. So I want to change this fine tuning, and I actually don't want to use a rate. And I want to do something else too. I don't want it to be a sine wave. I'm going to do something complicated, maybe a pattern, okay? Now, I don't want this to jump around a lot. So watch what happens if I took this depth all the way up. Listen to what we hear. Okay, so first of all, my rate is really fast. I want this to modulate slowly. Okay, so it's modulating now left and right of the sound really slowly, slower at least. Let me turn this down even more. But the biggest thing is I want just a little bit of modulation of the pitch, okay? And another thing I want to do is take this attack and actually turn it up. because what this should do, it should help to smooth this out a little bit. So let's set this rate down, way down then, which is tightening up that pitch modulation. And now listen. Okay, I think, man, I thought there was an easier way to make this smooth, but I don't see a smoother. Yeah, anyway, so now I have a little bit of pitch modulation happening on every single, on a note. I might even turn this up to 4 bars. So then when I combine that with A, I hear this. Right? You can hear the A panning is going on. Maybe I'm also going to put this up a fifth, a perfect fifth. So let's put 7. Okay, now this saw wave is way louder than the grind, so let's turn this down. There we go. Now we have a nice sound that is modulating the fine tuning and also the panning of this sound. Okay, so anyway, so we can go, there's all kinds of things we can modulate too. We can also modulate the main filter. So let's modulate the cutoff of this main filter. So I'm going to select the cutoff, and what I'm going to do is turn this on, and I'm going to set this actually to another ADSR. If I do ADSR 1, the filter is actually going to map this line, which is exactly the same as the amp envelope, right? Basically, I'm using the amp envelope to also change a filter. So if I pull this down, remember, if I have the frequency at 20,000 hertz, it's not going to do anything, right? I need to turn this down first. And then again, most importantly, again, I cannot forget to turn the depth up. Okay, so when I turn the depth up here to 28%, now you see the orange line, and you should hear the filter change. I might have to make some adjustments. So you hear the filter open. Let's make it even more dramatic. Take the depth up. So it's actually not doing a whole lot. I'm going to turn the res up too so you hear it better. Now it's starting to come through. Okay, so if we wanted though, imagine we wanted to actually not use the exact same envelope to map this volume, or sorry, not map this filter change. What if I wanted to use a second ADSR to do that, which is pretty common? I'm going to go to ADSR and say new ADSR, and I'm going to turn actually the filter up to 1 full second. And I can also grab this line and actually turn it into a straight line. And I'm going to make my release time long also. So now listen to what happens. The note values, or the amp envelope, is different now, because envelope 1 here is different than envelope 2. And envelope 2 is going to shape this sound differently. So we should hear now the filter open up over time, over 1 second. Okay, so you're hearing that on every sound, which is pretty interesting, works pretty well. So, cool. Now let's add, just for fun, add another sound to this and do another separate set of modulations. I'm going to do another sound. Let's do something that's kind of, I don't know, let's see what this buzz is like. Again, I can go to C and solo it and hear what it sounds like. Kind of like that one. Maybe we'll use that. Okay. And what I want to do is, again, I want to actually change this fine tuning. So I'm going to turn this on. Now, I don't want to use this pattern, right? Because then my fine tuning is going to match that other fine tuning from oscillator B. I want it to be different. So I'm going to go to new LFO again. And this time I'm actually going to do a serial smooth pattern. Let's see what this looks like. Yeah, something like this. Actually, this might have been a better choice than this one because you could hear the little pops as it moved, right? But now I have a smooth line. So this should sound pretty smooth. So I want to fine tune this just a little bit again, right? So I turn the depth up just to 14-15%. So I just get a little bit of oscillation of that fine tuning. Let's hear what this sounds like. Okay, now it's way too fast, right? I actually want to slow this rate down. Maybe 4 bars. Okay, maybe I'll give it a little more too. It'll make it just funkier, especially once I combine it with B. So let's listen to just B and C. So you're getting that rich sound of the two sounds rubbing together, right? Because they're slightly out of tune, which is pretty interesting. So let's also go and modulate the panning on this. So on, and I'm going to do something new again. This time I'm going to use what's called a sequencer, okay? So I click on sequencer, and the sequencer literally is just a set of values that could be anything, but in this case, these values are going to represent pan, okay? And this can actually be really useful just for all kinds of things. You can match it to pitch, you can have it do all kinds of, I can also increase this up to as many of these as I want. I would have to go through all of them though, right, and change some of them. So as we go here, yeah, let's just get through. There's 40 of them, that's fine. So now this is attached to the panning of C, and again, I need to turn the depth up, all right? So I turn up that depth, and now I should be able to hear this panning around. So this smoothing button too also helps this. So another thing to remember too is that right now my note values are 16th notes, and I can actually lower this to make it move slower, right? It's now going to move slower and be like just change over time. So anyway, so that's pretty interesting sound. You know, maybe I like this sound, but I'm going to actually take it up an octave, leave it at 12. And that kind of just adds more, you know, a shimmer to it. So let's do something now that's going to drastically change this sound. I'll just turn A back on here. What we've got. I'm going to introduce another filter. Okay, and what I'm going to do is turn the filter on, and this time I'm going to actually make a rhythmic pattern out of the cutoff filter. Okay, so what I'm going to do, let's choose another low pass filter. Let's just do this one. I'm going to set this actually really low, the outgoing filter. So listen right now. Why is that not working? Well, I don't know why that's doing that. I thought these could just go at the same time. Well, anyways, let me do something else then, since that's not working the way I expected. I'm going to take this filter, instead of having it go wah, I'm actually going to map that to a rhythm, okay? And if I again click on sequencer, choose a new sequencer, I'm going to choose 16th notes and then just set these values to random. In fact, actually let me do kind of a triplet-y type of pattern like this. So now what I'm going to hear is a rhythm created because the cutoff filter is going to be mapped to these values. So let's turn the depth way up, and listen to what this sounds like. So what's happening, of course, is that we've created rhythm by having this cutoff filter running in 16th notes, right? And it's just mapping to the cutoff of this as it goes. And that's how I'm ending up with this really cool effect that sounds like it's a rhythm pattern, but really what's happening is I'm holding the notes down on the keyboard and I'm just letting the filter play rhythms basically as it goes. So it's really cool effect, really interesting and useful. But you can map things to all kinds of sounds. So if I really wanted to make something crazy now, I could choose something. Well, again, if I went to this filter and we chose something like FM over here, it makes a pretty dramatic change, right? We haven't talked about FM synthesis yet, but essentially what I'm doing is multiplying one signal by another. And that's what's turned this into kind of this mechanical robot sound. You can try these other ones too, like these comb filters. Give you some really rich and beautiful effects that can be really neat. Yeah, so really cool things to play around with. There are other types of modulation in here too. So let's just go to pan. This is number 4 here. I can make, I can't remember what this one does. Oh, here I can actually draw my own envelopes. Oh, which I was just talking about in class the other day, that I didn't think you could do this, but there you go. So here you draw your own envelopes, and you can map that to pan, for instance, right? So now if I turn this up, the panner on D is going to map this envelope that I just made down here, right? Which is pretty interesting. So anyways, there is this whole section down here at the bottom that I'm going to talk about in class, and it's actually really interesting in how you can control your synthesizer and stuff with it. And I'll talk about this, but I don't really want to cover it in this video. It's good to know too that there are effects that you can add. Again, my choice in general when I'm writing music is to have the effects outside the synthesizers, but you could, for instance, turn on a reverb, for instance, or a delay, and then your whole sound. So that is generally the idea. There is also an arpeggiator inside Alchemy that you can plug in if you want down here. But what I'm interested in, of course, for this assignment is that you design and talk about your own synthesizer, right? And so that's really all of what I'm talking about is from in here. That's really what I'm interested in, you explaining your synth and how you came up with it. So hope this video is helpful, and I will see you in class.